Okay, let's try. Right, according to this, we should be live now as we speak, Andre. So, okay. Andre Botha of the Endangered Wildlife Trust, welcome. Thank you for joining me. It's really, really good of you to take some time out. I know you're a very, very busy man. So just start, I know all about, well, I know a bit about what you do because I follow you on Facebook. Just explain a bit about the EWT and the work you get up to with them.
Okay, yeah. Generally, I am quite busy, but I'm quite a confined man, like so many others around the globe at the moment. So, yeah, trying to keep busy. Thanks for the invite and wanting to talk to me about what we do and the work that we do in general. So I work and am employed by the Endangered Wildlife Trust, which is a conservation NGO based in South Africa, but we do work focused across sub-Sahara Africa at this stage. And the work that I'm particularly currently involved in is managing a program known as the Vultures for Africa program, which focuses on the implementation of the multi-species action plan for African Eurasian vultures, particularly in the sub-Saharan region, and then currently mostly focused on Southern and East Africa. So that's what I do, but the EWT focuses on a much broader spectrum of conservation projects, looking at a range of species and then a range of habitats. We have a carnivore program that works with a range of species: leopard, lion, wild dog, cheetah, etc. We have a crane program that focuses on all of the cranes in Africa. We have programs focused on amphibians, a range of other species, but then also looking at specific habitats. So it's an organization that's been in existence since 1973. And most of that, and part of the reason for the establishment of the organization back in 1973 was vulture conservation at that stage, primarily in South Africa. And that's now expanded quite substantially to the rest of the continent, and in many ways also beyond that to Europe and Asia, with our involvement in the drafting of the multi-species action plan that looks at all three continents and focuses on all old world vultures.
Yeah, so I'll put it in the comments thing, the web address for EWT, because I had a quick look on the page before I came on air, and there's loads of stuff on there. All the amphibians, the mammals, all the different areas you cover, and then obviously the bird of prey programs and the Vulture for Africa stuff you do. So it was, and there's some videos, isn't there? I saw there's some quite cool YouTube videos. Yes. On there as well, so I'll stick that in the comments as well. Just so obviously, I imagine most of this is going to be taken up by talking about vultures, and hopefully most people tuning into Raptor Aid will know a little bit about the plight of the vultures. I hope so anyway, because we share it enough. But do you want to just cover a bit about what the current situation is to anyone who's probably not quite up to speed with what's happening with vultures in Africa, and then obviously the wider impact Europe and Asia as well?
Yeah, we could certainly talk about vultures for as long as you have time. I normally people get a bit unnerved because once you start talking about them, you don't quite stop. It's a fairly complex situation. But before I do that, probably also to just say that the Birds of Prey program that the EWT runs, I was also responsible for the management of that for about 14 years. And through that work, which focused on a much broader range, it focused on all the birds of prey that occur in Southern Africa. And we also did work on southern ground hornbills and species like oxpeckers, for instance, which are tiny birds that are not predatory at all, but that also deserved conservation attention. So I've been fortunate in the 16 years that I've been with the Trust to work on a wide spectrum of projects, engaging with colleagues in some of the other programs as well. So it's been an interesting experience, and pretty fortunate that the Trust enables us to do this work and to focus on various things and to develop programs to the extent that is necessary to do effective conservation. So to get back to the vultures, they certainly, within an African context, we very widely talk about the African vulture crisis. We also know, and many people will be familiar with the situation in South Asia, where vultures have declined calamitously in the 1990s and early 2000s, from millions of birds to less than 20,000 of 3 species due to a single factor, and that was the introduction of the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory diclofenac. In Africa, the situation is a lot more complex, and the threats that vultures face are also more varied, but by far the most significant of those threats would be poisoning in various forms. And we can probably talk about some of the different types and so on if there's time. But we've seen with an analysis that was done and published in 2015 that the vulture species that do occur in Africa, and there are 11 of those that occur here, on average declined by about 68% over the entire populations in Africa over a 30-year period. And it's sad to say that some of those declines have actually increased in the last 6-7 years due to a range of factors. So vultures in Africa, but also elsewhere in the old world, in particular in Asia, are certainly up against it. They are facing a crisis, and we are really challenged in terms of implementing effective conservation and continuing some of the good work that's already been done in some areas, and to try and expand that to areas where no work is being done at all. But there are also, amongst all of that, there are some good news stories, and I think that's what we generally focus on. And we try and emulate that in areas where it needs to be done. There are encouraging signs in certain places, but then in others, the challenge is massive, and there's a huge amount of work that still needs to be done, not just for us in the current generation, but I think in the foreseeable future, to try and get some of these populations back to any similarity of what they were 100 years ago is going to require a substantial amount of work, a lot of resources, and a lot of people that need to be involved and that support the work and that actually gets involved hands-on as well.
Yeah, and I suppose it's worth pointing out that, as you've touched on, this isn't just restricted to Africa. Even though we're obviously having you here, that's what I want to hear about. Is it's a global. This is a global issue, a crisis. It is a crisis, and it's going to impact on everyone, whether you're sat in your kitchen like me in Britain, to Africa and across Europe and Asia. It's a real problem. So you touched on poisoning. Is that the biggest issue you're facing at the moment in Africa? If you were to pick one.
Yes, without a doubt. And it's really, in terms of the work that I do day to day, probably the primary focus. There's no doubt that the different types of poisoning has had a significant impact and still has. I mean, as we speak, we are dealing with a massive incident that's taken place in West Africa, in Guinea-Bissau, where at current count, we have lost in excess of 1,600 hooded vultures in this incident that has taken place at various sites in that country. That's linked to political instability, that's linked to the belief use, where people believe that if they are in possession of the head of a vulture, that it gives them protection. In these uncertain times, from a human perspective, you can almost, to a certain extent, understand why people would do it, but you just cannot understand the large-scale slaughter of these animals to satisfy the need of a smaller number of people. So there are challenges. I mean, the poisoning happens in various ways. And we've really approached it from the perspective of trying to enable and capacitate people on the ground that have got to deal with these challenges in terms of, firstly, being able to identify these poisoning incidents when they happen a lot quicker, to know what they look at, and then to know what to do and to initiate the correct steps to try and reduce the impact of these incidents. People very quickly in the first world will ask you, but why don't you just ban all of the substances that are out there that people use to kill animals? Right. It's not that simple. There's so much of it out there. There's so much of it flowing in continuously through various programs, a lot of it linked to agricultural activity and so on, that there's no way that you will get rid of these substances at current levels. So it's out there. People are using it. They are using it for the wrong reasons and for purposes that it's not been manufactured for. And it's up to us then to try and intervene when they do use it and when it impacts wildlife, to try and step in, reduce the amount of mortalities as much as we can. We're fortunate in that respect that we do have support from a range of partners in Africa that we work with very closely, that agree with the approach that we follow and that we work with. And we are also very fortunate that we have partners from outside of Africa, on the one hand, in terms of know-how, of capacity, of assisting with the work that we are doing, and that also assists with supporting us in terms of funding. We have a very strong working relationship with the Hawk Conservancy Trust that I know that you're very familiar with. And we've had that working relationship for more than 10 years, primarily through the contract was established between Campbell Myrne and myself when he came through to Africa and did his PhD study on the white-headed vulture here. I think we realized that we sort of think about things in the same way. We both realized that there's a need to work with it, and through that realization also established ties with a number of other organizations and partners in Africa and outside. So the partnership has now been formalized over the last 3-4 years, and it's known as the Endangered Wildlife Trust or Conservancy Trust and University of Reading Partnership. And they are providing substantial financial support for the work that we do. They are certainly also part of the planning and the execution of that in terms of providing assistance, guidance in terms of priorities for the work that we should be doing. It's not just focused on the poisoning per se, but it also enables us to engage with people on the ground in Africa where there's a lack of knowledge in terms of vultures, the issues that affect them, is to capacitate local people in various countries in Africa. And at the moment, we're working in Zambia, we're working in Mozambique. We've started engaging with people in Malawi and elsewhere, is to try and fill these knowledge gaps by training people up locally to sort of work, conduct research, conduct monitoring, and so on and so forth. But the partnership certainly has enabled us to do that. And with the involvement of the University of Reading, we also measure the impact of the work that we are doing. So it's not just about counting heads when you conduct training of rangers and other law enforcers. It's to see how well they use that training, how effective they are in implementing it. And yeah, I mean, the very early results show that in areas where they do implement it effectively, where they do plan, where they are prepared, they can make a significant difference. But there also are the unfortunate examples of where people do get trained and where they simply forget about what they have been trained on. They don't follow through, they don't prepare, they don't plan. And unfortunately, it does show in the results and in the losses that are suffered when incidents do happen. So it's a continued challenge, but I think we have made a significant difference, and linked to that is also then bringing in other approaches and other tools that we can add to try and alleviate and reduce the impact. A good example of that, for instance, is now we have reached an agreement with the Junta Andalucia in Spain to come to Africa and to work with us and the Endangered Wildlife Trust in particular to train poisoning sniffer dogs that can be deployed and that can be used when these incidents do take place, but they could also be used as a preventative tool, at border posts, at entrances to parks, etc., where people might be transporting chemicals, etc., in, is to try and prevent these from ending up in the wrong hands and in the wrong places. So it's one example of looking at other solutions to the problem other than just training people. It's looking at continuously expanding on what we can do and enabling people to use these tools and to have access to these tools at the same time.
Yeah, and I know because I follow the Hawk Conservancy Trust closely, and I've got some great friends there, and hopefully people again who follow Raptor Aid will be aware of the work that the Hawk Conservancy Trust do, the great conservation work they do. And I'll put in the comments box again a link to the Hawk Conservancy Trust, because there's obviously the poison response kits that they've developed with yourself at the EWT and the University of Reading. How have they been a real helping hand in your work in relation to training people and supporting communities with these issues?
Yes, I mean, the kits are certainly a very important tool. I mean, it's one thing providing people with knowledge and skills, and then they sit in often very remote areas, and they simply don't have the equipment to do the basic work to address and reduce the impact of the poisoning, to collect samples for analysis and so on and so forth. And unless you provide them with these basic tools, they simply cannot do that. So it's a critical component of the added value that we bring to the training is through providing that. We've also looked at slightly different approaches in certain areas. You know, I think one of the challenges that we face in certain places is if you put these kits together, and they are compiled in South Africa, we source the materials, the bags are made by a community-based project where ladies from a local community are making the bags that the equipment goes in. But the moment you start shipping this outside of South Africa and into certain countries in Africa, it becomes pretty expensive from a customs and excise perspective. So in Southern Africa in particular, we generally can move these items fairly effectively at an affordable cost. But when it goes beyond that, we are looking at, and we have a list of equipment, and then looking at maybe enabling organizations in country to actually compile these kits and put it together themselves, and then issuing it to the various sites where we do conduct training. Yeah. And that does seem to work in certain areas, and certainly beyond Africa, where we've recently, just before the lockdowns, etc., started, we did some training in Cambodia in Southeast Asia. And we conducted 2 training sessions there, and ahead of time just forwarded the list of equipment that is needed for these kits. They put it together. The BirdLife International Cambodia program sourced everything, put the kits together. So when the training was concluded, we were able to hand over these kits to the relevant sites where it was needed. And they've been using those. And the good news from Cambodia is that they've been able to intervene in 3 incidents already in the month since the training has taken place. And they're quite excited about this. There's good momentum even there to start addressing this. So, within Africa and outside of Africa, where people are empowered, where they are equipped, they can make a difference. And, one is encouraged to see where they do what needs to be done and they do the right thing. And people are prepared, they have planned, they have things ready, they make significant differences. And it's those sorts of success stories that really motivates you and that helps you to keep going, so that when you face incidents like we currently do in Guinea-Bissau, and maybe a number of other incidents that have happened over the last 15 months or so, that certainly keeps you going and it keeps you motivated, because working in that sort of environment, working with wildlife poisoning, it's not the most uplifting sort of environment to be in a lot of the time.
I can imagine it's pretty. I mean, I've read from afar about the Guinea-Bissau incident, and I can imagine it's pretty grisly work to be involved in. Someone's actually just asked: has there been an update on, or are there any updates on what's happened with the Guinea-Bissau case, where there was so many vultures, obviously hooded vultures, killed? Is there any latest news?
Well, the political instability is unfortunately still fairly prevalent, but fortunately there were 2 teams that were able to be deployed into the field that went to the 2 sites where most of these poisonings had taken place. So they were able to go and assess the situation firsthand. They confirmed the motivation behind the poisoning being associated with belief use, where people were looking for protection. And that is to a certain extent linked to the political instability that took place around about the same time the first poisonings took place. That stability or instability hasn't really changed significantly. And the good news is that we were able to, with one of our representatives on the ground, a member of the Vulture Specialist Group of the IUCN, we were able to get permits and to actually get 3 of the vulture carcasses out of Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau doesn't have any capacity to conduct toxicological analysis, for instance, on these birds. So we were able to move 3 of these carcasses on the last flight out of Guinea-Bissau before the lockdown took place. They were flown out to Portugal. They are currently at the university in Lisbon. The post-mortems have been carried out. The analysis is taking a bit of time. You need to keep in mind, and I'm sure that you are very aware in Europe how the lockdown has affected all of you. So it's taking a bit of time. The simple fact about determining what the substance is it's a little bit after the fact. And the simple fact is that the current toll of vultures that have been killed is just over 1,600 that we know of. All of those, with the exception of a single whiteback vulture, are all hooded vultures. And hooded vultures in West Africa are birds that are living commensally with people. They live in towns, in cities. They play a significant role in and they provide a sanitary service to a lot of these settlements by removing human waste, by feeding on waste dumps, removing a lot of organic material that could potentially be sources where certain species like flies, etc., could really proliferate and could be a problem in terms of the spread of some diseases potentially. So, Guinea-Bissau is considered to be a stronghold for the species, or was considered to be a stronghold for the species in West Africa. And losses like this simply has been a devastating blow to the already declining populations of vultures in West Africa per se. So there's a lot of concern around this. There are challenges in engaging with governments, or who the government is and who the right people are to talk to. Lots of challenges around this. And at the moment, of course, with the COVID situation, restricted movements and so on and so forth, it's anybody's guess what is happening at the moment. So there is a lot of concern around this, but we have engaged at a level through the IUCN, through the Convention on Migratory Species, through CITES, etc. I think to a very large extent, there's a lot more awareness inside the country, but also outside the country. And we will certainly try and do what we can remotely initially to do what needs to be done. And then longer term idea would be for us to engage directly once the situation has gone back to a position where you can actually go to the country, is to probably engage in a similar sort of initiative to what we've done in Eastern South Africa, to start with training, make people aware of the risks associated with the use of these toxins, the killing of these birds, the impact that it has, and then training people on the ground to better respond to these incidents so that you don't end up with hundreds of birds being poisoned. There might still be losses, but to reduce it significantly. So I think one of our key focal areas would be to expand the initiative, also considering that we'll probably need to look at translating the materials that we are using and so on, but it's to engage and to try and get training done in that part of the world to make people able to respond better and to reduce the impact of these incidents when they happen.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's just nice to know that you're on the ground, and I know I feel I should touch on now. If anyone does visit the EWT website or the Hawk Conservancy, you can donate. You know, because as you were mentioning, the work that needs to be done. All I could think of, as much as I hate to, I'm not money orientated at all. It's certainly with, but conservation and this sort of work costs money. So yeah. And it's often, we found this out yesterday talking to Jason from the Philippine Eagle Foundation, when another crisis occurs like COVID-19, it has an impact on conservation even further, because resources are removed often from things that are seen as not so important potentially, and wildlife conservation to be pushed into, you know, a more anthropological thing. So yeah, if anyone can make a donation, that would be greatly appreciated. I have had another question about, I don't want to be too doom and gloom. It's difficult with vultures, I know, sadly, at the moment. Someone's asked about electrocutions. How do you, are the power boards or the people that have the infrastructure in place, are they working with you at the moment, or how's that working when it comes to collisions with power lines and large birds in general, than not just birds of prey?
Well, from an African perspective, the impact of energy infrastructure is a bit of an unknown, except for probably South Africa, where we, for more than 30 years, have had a very close and a strong partnership and working relationship with the electricity utility in our country. And we've worked with them in partnership. They've actually spent huge amounts of money and working with us. And we have a team of people through our wildlife energy program that goes out and does assessments of power lines. We have a system where people can report mortalities to us in this country. We've got a database that goes back about 25 years of all power line mortalities, both electrocutions and collisions. And also, of course, now with the new so-called green energy or the renewable energy in the form of wind turbines, that's been added to the database. As these developments expand in South Africa, we are keeping tabs on that. We are engaging with those utilities, also with the companies that develop these facilities. And we have a finger on the pulse in terms of where the problem areas are, where the high risk areas are. We're in a good position that we can influence decisions in terms of the routing of networks and where they run, so that they are not established too close to flyways where birds could be affected by it. And then likewise also in Africa with the large game that we have, we work with wildlife authorities, for instance, in areas to ensure that, that these lines don't impact animals like giraffes and elephants that like to push over things. They push over a utility pole, and a whole lot of things can be affected by that. It's to sort of work with them on ways to deter or to reduce impact with some of this infrastructure with large animals. So that's been going, and it does work. And I think with the work that we've done and with the amount of support that we get from them in a South African context, we've done remarkably well, and they've done fantastic work over the last 25 years. The downside of this is, probably with the exception of Namibia, there isn't really a program like this in any other country in Africa. So of the 54 countries across the continent, from what we know at the moment, there are 2 that are monitoring these sorts of things. The rest of the continent is there. There are extensive networks. There are plans for much more of these, or many more of these networks, to be developed across the continent. More than 60% of the African population today still doesn't have access to electricity. So there is a demand for it. And because there is a demand, because in many cases governments are dependent on votes, and it's one of those nice carrots to hang in front of the nose of the voter, is that we will provide. These networks are going to be developed. It's just the reality, and we need to be in a position to start influencing these decisions in terms of where those lines are, what they are, what the construction are, what the configurations are, before these massive new projects are rolled out. We have started engaging, and we are fortunate in that the example that we can use with this partnership that we've had with the utility in South Africa, we can engage with utilities elsewhere in Africa through this utility, rather than a conservationist like me going and sitting and then trying to encourage the utility to do the right thing, is to bring the utility into play. They go and sit around a table and they put forward this very convincing and this, well, it's a bit of a no-brainer if you think about it, how much money you save from not having power outs, from not having to go and repair lines the whole time that are damaged when these collisions and electrocutions occur. The utility goes there and puts forward this argument. It's a lot more convincing. And we've started doing that. Some of our staff have been up into East Africa earlier this year. We've actually started engaging about 10 years ago with utilities up there. It takes a while in terms of uptake, but we are confident that that the message is starting to get across, and that there will be changes made. But I think, to answer the initial question, yes, these lines certainly do have an impact, and that's why it's important that we are in a position to influence where they are developed, where they run, and to make sure that the structures are, on the one hand, safe if birds or animals do make use of them, and to try and reduce the risk of collision as much as we possibly can.
Brilliant. Well, it does. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they are listening to you. But when you again, when you were talking about the countries, I was thinking to myself, yeah, well, Africa's a continent, it's huge. It's like, it's
Yes.
so good luck with that one. Yeah, that's. But it sounds like you're doing a great job. Right. Okay. Let's have a bit of not so much sort of macabre deaths and poisonings and stuff like that. I know, obviously, for me, I get asked this question a lot. In fact, I'll leave this question till the end. But I think you've got a dream job, personally. I think I've been lucky enough to go to Africa a couple of times, watching birds of prey and doing various things. What's your go-to place, Andre? You've been all over the place. So go on. What's your for pure bird of prey experience? You can say one or two, three or four if you want. But yeah. What's your number?
It's very difficult to single out a single place. I mean, I think in terms of life experience for me personally, I've had a lifelong association, and I've been fortunate to work in the Kruger National Park on and off for 30 years. So quite obviously, it would be one of the first places that come to mind. Spent many days, years in the field, initially way before, the primary focus became birds per se. My background really is formal conservation and the management of areas. So I was a ranger and trained rangers and was sort of working in anti-poaching, and it all started there back in the late 1980s. And it's a place that really is really part of who I am, and sort of to a very large extent shaped who I am, and I'm fortunate in a way that a lot of that experience I can still put to good use today. When you engage with rangers anywhere in Africa, there's a common thread that runs through it, and it makes it a lot easier when you engage with them and you train, and now you talk to them about the conservation of birds and other wildlife in terms of poisoning. But that common thread is there, that we are rangers, and I think like one. I know what they do. I know the challenges that they face because I was one myself.
Yeah.
And you sort of learn through what they do that rangers operate most efficiently if they have people that lead from the front, that know what their needs are, that make sure that they are properly equipped and that they're properly trained. And this is one component that I can add on to now with adding this into it, especially in terms of making sure that they ensure their own safety when they engage with these incidents. So yeah, getting back to sites and getting back to positive things, Kruger most certainly will always be part of who I am. But I've been very fortunate in being able to travel to many parts of Africa, seeing some really amazing places and seeing amazing things, seeing some amazing wildlife spectacles that as a 7, 8, 10-year-old kid lying on his bed, paging through an atlas and reading books, and I still have quite a few of those books that I had as a kid, these animal encyclopedias and all that sort of stuff. I think, well, I want to see this and I want to see that. I've been very fortunate in being able to go to a lot of these places and to see quite a lot of that. So it's a bit unfair to really ask me, even if it's just in an African context, what would you say? There are just so many. And then when you go to other continents, which I've also been lucky to do, seeing tigers in the wild in Asia, seeing Asian elephants in the wild, even going to South America and into the Amazon basin. We still are so fortunate to live on this incredibly amazing planet that we call home. It's just a pity that we tend to, rather than look after it, tend to just think that it's become one of the utilities and something that we could use. And if it doesn't have value to us in terms of pounds or dollars or whatever, then it doesn't have value at all. I think there's so much still out there that is amazing and that people should really cover and should look after. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen, but there's still an amazing amount to see and to enjoy. So I would encourage people, whenever you have the opportunity, again, who knows when that might be, considering the current situation, get out there and enjoy it as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. My go-to, I'm gonna indulge myself. It probably was a bit of a naughty question to ask, really, especially, yeah, because I couldn't answer it. But one of my, when it comes to, if someone asked me about Africa, I've been lucky enough to go to the Drakensberg Mountains.
Mhm.
And I went up to Lesotho as well, and watched the bearded vulture fly across the top, cruise about my height, like our level. So yeah, and then we went for a beer in that pub that's at the top up there as well.
Pass. Yes.
Yeah, the Sardi Pass. So that was perfect for me. That was that's one memory that I'll never forget. So
yeah, I've been fortunate in that I spent 8 years of my career as a ranger working in the Drakensberg, in the Northern Berg in particular, and being fortunate to see bearded vultures on a regular basis. I remember we one year did an aerial survey of that entire mountain massif and counting all of the bearded vulture nests, flying, sometimes flying with them. Also following on that, more recently, about 12 years ago, sort of doing another survey in a much smaller helicopter and having a few interesting experiences with hectic winds and so on, and sort of making sure that you try and get on the ground as soon as you possibly can. So there have been lots of interesting moments and experiences as well with that. But those montane areas most certainly are quite amazing. And wonderful to work in. So again, as I say, I've been very fortunate in being able to work there, working in areas like Kruger, and then going to lots of other places in Africa that are just as astounding. I mean, the Serengeti Mara system, the Ruwenzoris in southern Uganda, places like that. Going up to Murchison Falls in Uganda a couple of months ago. There are just so many areas. The Kalahari, where I'm supposed to have been now, busy working, if it wasn't for the lockdown. There's just so much that you can enjoy and that we are privileged to see. For me, it's almost unthinkable that people would prefer to ignore these things existing and sort of live a completely urban existence. But to each his own. Just fortunate that we enjoy this sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I've got the question I was going to put to the end. You've kind of answered some of it in there. Is one of the questions I often get asked when I go to universities or schools or whatever scenario is with the younger generation or younger people than me, is how do I get involved? So if this might be a really difficult question again, and you've kind of partly answered how I answer, is to get out there and just do it. You've said that. But if you were to give a young raptor biologist, conservationist, or just anyone interested in raptors one bit of advice, what would it be to finish off with? This is what we're going to finish off with.
Well, I was for a moment there very tempted to sort of put on a very solemn face and say, don't do it. But that would be lying. I mean, I never have regretted doing this, but I think to a very large extent, for many of us that are doing this, we are born to do this. It's something that's been part of my conscious for as long as I've known myself. I'm doing what I've wanted to do from way back then. It's not something that you do as a bit of a gimmick. It really is, and yeah, it's a bit of a cliche, but it is a calling. Rather than a job. I mean, if you see this as just a job, then you probably shouldn't be in it. If you see it as an opportunity to just work and play with animals, it's also something that I can tell you now. It's one of the first lessons that you learn when you work in this. You probably don't work directly hands-on with animals as much as you think that you can do. I mean, there are a couple of exceptions, but I'm talking about animals out there in situ, not animals in captivity. But I would never discourage young people to become part of this. At the same time, you can also say to people, you need to be realistic in your expectations. But I would say if you are motivated, you are keen, you are interested, again, as you said, get out there, start doing it. Make yourself be known in terms of your interest in what you want to do. You can start basically just with your environmental club at school, start doing work with them, go on these outings, get involved with it. And if you have, and I think one of the great things about UK culture, and I'm fortunate to sort of have spent quite a bit of time there on occasion, is your culture of volunteerism that you have. I think to start out as volunteers working and you know, just seeing how people are engaged, and you know, sometimes people even of a fairly advanced age that have been volunteers at organizations like Walk Conservancy for many years. That's how you can start off doing it.
Yep.
But you know, if you want to really make a career out of it, the other important thing is make sure that you get a proper you know, a proper qualification, that you study and get a degree within the field that you can then use. You know, it so often happens that people somehow think that they can short circuit the process and just get out there. And as long as I love animals and as long as I put myself out there, it'll be good. You still need a good grounding, you still need good education, and you still need a good training to be able to do a lot of these things. And many people will tell you that. And I also work with conservationists that have been there, that maybe haven't all gone all that way to get that education, and they end up very often being frustrated, and they ultimately then at an older age go back to the books and go back to studying to get to where they need to be. So you'll need to do that. You've got to eat the spinach and the broccoli together with the other nicer stuff to get where you need to. But the simple thing is just get yourself out there and do it. You know, when I started studying for this back in the day, people say to me, but you're not going to get a job and it doesn't pay a lot of money. Well, firstly, the amount of what you get paid doesn't really matter if this is what you do. I don't care about salaries that much as long as I can exist and as long as I can eat. But it's doing the job that is what it's all about. But likewise, you know, since I've finished my initial undergrad studies, I've never been out of a job. And I've been fortunate, but I think a lot of people can say the same. It's once you get into it and you sort of establish yourself, I don't really think you would want to do anything else. So I would highly recommend people to consider it as an option, but you need to make sure that this is something that you really, really want to do.
Definitely, yeah. I've always said the same thing. Passion. It's all about if you're passionate about it, you can make it. You can make it happen. And yeah,
I'm a little bit weary about the word passion. It's thrown about very loosely. You know, you need to just look at some of these reality TV shows where singing is my passion, and when somebody opens their mouth, it's pretty horrendous. So I think we need to just. Yes, it needs to be a passion, but you need to make sure that it really is a passion, and that you really have aptitude for it as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to check out my singing. My singing voice, definitely. I don't have passion for that. I can assure you that. I can stay. Brilliant. Right, Andre, I'm going to let you go. I know you're very busy, and I've got another thing coming up as well in 15 minutes. So thank you ever so much for taking the time to talk to us. I could have talked to you all afternoon. Both our afternoons. Yeah. So it's been a pleasure. And if I get any more questions, I'll forward them on to you. But thank you very much. I will end the live streaming now. Anyone got any other questions? Feel free to drop them in, and we'll have another live stream soon. All right, thanks everyone. Bye for now.